afternoon, and welcome to Live Impact News right here on 13 News Now Plus. It is 1 o'clock p.m. on the dot, January 13th, 2026, and it is a Tuesday as we move into our second full week of January. We, of course, are here for 2 hours of all of the most live, most breaking, most impactful news for you here locally, nationally, and globally as well. And we are going to move through those 2 hours with the unmistakable excellence of the people's producer, Naya Campbell. Naya, how are you today?
I'm doing good. How are you, Connor?
You know, I feel like the last 2 days we started off our stream and we were very busy right from the jump. There were just big headlines happening right in the moment. Today, we get to, at least to a certain degree, ease into our stream.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that we don't have huge headlines to get to. It doesn't mean that we don't have live events happening right now that we're about to go listen in on. But a somewhat more sort of normally paced start to our stream today, Naya, which we haven't had in a little bit.
Yeah, and I think we can chill a little bit, you know?
We'll see. See, you say that.
Oh, yeah, I just jinxed it.
And now that those words have come out of your mouth, I'm sure we're going to get some breaking news coming our way. But instead, we start with a story that we covered extensively yesterday. We heard comments from elected officials. We heard personal anecdotes from athletes on both sides of this argument. And now today, we will actually hear from the Supreme Court as they debate or as they hear different arguments when it comes to bans on trans athletes' participation in sports of which are consistent with their gender identity, right? So let's do a better explanation of what we're talking about here than that choppy sentence that I just began with, okay? These are cases where federal courts have blocked state laws that would prohibit trans girls from competing on teams consistent with their gender identity. We're talking specifically about cases in Idaho and West Virginia, though there are laws of this sort in 27 states across America. So this will likely have widespread implications. When it comes to North Carolina, there is, in fact, a state law banning trans girls from competing on teams consistent with their gender identity. In Virginia, there is no law, but there is a state regulation or agency policy banning trans girls from competing on teams consistent with their gender identity. And it is a case that the Supreme Court is hearing arguments on right now as we speak. Yesterday, we listened in and they were hearing a different case. We know today that they're hearing arguments on this case. We do believe that that's happening right now. We are going to listen in and see if they are currently discussing this issue live from the Supreme Court in Washington, D.C. Let's have a listen right now.
She came in near the back. It wasn't.
But I'm sorry to interrupt, but you wouldn't have a different rule if she was finishing in the top five.
No, but it wasn't a zero.
Or if they had cuts.
But what I'm saying is in
this particular case, but usually with teams, I don't mean to, just don't want to get out of that. Usually with teams, they're cuts.
Yes.
Those mean a lot to people. There's starting lineups. Those mean a lot to people. There's who gets a college recruit. That means a lot to people.
Yes. I just want to say that there still are some areas where there are win-win solutions. I think even being able to be on practices with a team consistent with your gender identity instead of your sex assigned at birth can be enormously important. So I think some scenarios are zero-sum, but not everything having to do with sports is. And I do think that one of the vices of this law is that it sweeps so broadly that even win-win solutions are taken off the table. In terms of aspects where it's zero-sum, no one likes to lose. No one likes to not make the team. And people often don't make the team. The cisgender girls don't make the team when competing against other cisgender girls all the time. And the question, I think, is whether it's an unfair advantage to not make the team because a transgender girl participated. And if there is no sex-based biological distinction there, then I think it's an unfortunate situation, but I think it's the unfortunate situation that comes with having a zero-sum game, not inherent unfairness. Then the third thing is, I think however the court resolves this case, I really urge the court not to do it based on a definition of sex argument. We are not disputing in this case that West Virginia can have its definition of sex. Our argument is it's using this definition to inflict discrimination and deny equal athletic opportunity, but we are not saying their definition of sex is wrong. However, I don't think it follows that Title IX created some national definition of sex that preempted states' ability to say, actually, we are most concerned about discrimination that happens through gender roles.
Can I ask you something? That's a very important point here, I think, for what happens in the future, what you just said. Do you think sex in Title IX can reasonably be interpreted to allow different states to take different understandings of that in their sports leagues?
I do, because I don't...
Why is that? That's real important, I think, going forward.
Right. Because I don't think the purpose of Title IX is to have an accurate definition of sex. I think the purpose is to make sure that sex isn't being used to discriminate by denying opportunities. Just as I don't think we need to define race in order to enforce Title VI. So I think I wouldn't look to whether or not it's accurate to classify, BPJ as male or female. I think the question is she being denied an opportunity because of that classification? But obviously sex can mean more than just
So if we didn't want to prevent a different state from making a different choice from West Virginia, what should we not say, or what should we say to prevent that from happening?
Well, I wrote down the answer to that when you asked Mr. Mupin. I have two things. I wrote, don't give definition of sex. And I also said I wouldn't decide this by assuming that Title IX provides a right to single-sex teams. In the regulations, single-sex teams are optional, they're not mandatory, and in addition to that, we're talking about the regulations, but on the ground, the way this plays out in practice is you have a 1979 policy statement, a sub-regulatory document that has a complicated test for determining when a sex-separated team is or is not required. And so I think that both because I think saying there's a right to a sex-separated team would predetermine some of the questions in that other case. That's one reason why I don't think you should do that. But second, I think the more the court gets into questions that are handled in these complex regulatory documents, I think the more I'd be worried about this court accidentally saying something about how Title IX works that doesn't actually map on to how it is actually playing out on the ground.
Title IX prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex. It's a statutory term. It must mean something. You're arguing that here there's discrimination on the basis of sex. And how can we decide that question without knowing what sex means in Title IX? I mean, it could mean biological sex. It could mean gender identity. It could mean whatever a state wants to define it to mean. But it has to mean something. How can we decide that without knowing what the statutory term means?
Well, I think there are a whole range of sex-based characteristics that can give rise to discrimination. I think if someone said, I'm going to discriminate against anyone who acts in a feminine manner, like anyone with limp wrists, I don't care who they are, but I'm going to discriminate against them. I think that would be sex discrimination. It would be sort of gender presentation. But I wouldn't say that's not covered by Title IX. And so I'm not saying that biological differences aren't part of sex, but I'm saying that sex also has broader connotations, and there's no reason to keep that out of the statute. And I'm certainly not saying that sex means gender identity. I just want to be very clear about that. I don't think that, just as, I would say this, our argument is that there's a group of people who are assigned male at birth for whom being placed on the boys' team is harmful, right? We happen to have a word for those people. It is transgender girls. But I don't think that means that we're elevating gender identity to be the new definition of sex. Just as in Phillips versus Martin Marietta, there's a subset of women, who are harmed by the policy. Not all women, but there's a subset of women who had young children. And there's a name for them, it's mothers, but that doesn't mean that we're replacing the word sex with mothers. I think
How do you respond to or deal with the other side's characterization of that harm as just the disparate impact of this regulation? That really, it's not discrimination, I think they're saying, but It is just the downstream effect of the application of the classification that the Javits Amendment allows, and that's just the way it goes.
Yeah, so I guess I would say this. I think this court has dealt with the issue of things like constructive denials and constructive discharges in a variety of contexts. And under Title IX, an outright denial isn't required. Davis says a constructive denial it also counts. And whenever there's a question of constructive denials, the court applies a standard that's reasonable person in the plaintiff's position under all the circumstances. And they use that for constructive denials. You've used that for retaliation claims. And if you look at Burlington versus White, I think it's very on point here, because one of the points that Burlington versus White said is that there's some actions that aren't going to be harmful to most people, but they might be harmful to some people. So Burlington versus White used a mother with young children might find a change in her work schedule to be incredibly harmful, right? That doesn't mean that, we're arguing that, this is a disparate impact classification on people who have young children. It's a sex classification. The sex classification is just harming some people and not harming other people. So that's how we would view it. I think this is a facial sex classification any way you cut it. And
I'm sorry, you don't think we should have an operating definition of sex in Title IX? Now, I understand the idea that, the question then becomes not whether or not there's discrimination on the basis of sex, but whether there's discrimination on the basis of whatever characteristic you think should be included in the definition of sex. Now, when it's used as a statutory term, I'm not sure you have that kind of flexibility. The question would be instead, what does Congress think the word means?
Well, Your Honor, I guess I'd say I think Congress prohibited discrimination based on sex.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and so I don't think that, just as I don't think Congress adopted a definition of race, in Title VI in order to prohibit discrimination on the basis of race. I think I'm not trying to police the accuracy of the terminology that's being used. All I'm saying is that what's being prohibited is using this classification to discriminate, not.
So but without really knowing what this distinction is.
Well, I don't think the examples I've given about sex-based characteristics fall outside the common understanding of things that are related to sex.
Well, related to sex. I guess what you're saying is then we do have to accept for your position that we're not dealing when Congress says sex, we're not dealing with biological sex. But we're dealing with other characteristics that people might associate with sex?
No. I think for this case, you can accept for the sake of this case that we're talking about what they've termed to be biological sex. I think that resolves this case. I was just talking about in addressing other potential cases.
So we don't have to say anything about the matter. You're willing for us to proceed on that assumption.
Exactly. Just like in Bostock, I think you can proceed for argument's sake. Without taking a definitive position here, because it might have downstream consequences in other cases that even the United States doesn't want the court to prejudge here. Now, I would like to say one quick thing on Justice Barrett's reference to separate classrooms. I mean, it is true, and the ACLU's litigated cases about theories that there's different brain sexes for women versus boys, and that's why you need separate classrooms. I think the instinct was completely correct that you can have a lot of scientific justifications for discrimination. That doesn't mean that the discrimination is allowed or immune from scrutiny. And in fact, some of the studies that are cited in the amicus brief say boys are naturally more aggressive, right, and favor competition more because that's in their DNA. So I do think even in these studies, the idea that you're completely, just basing it on pure biology and not on other generalizations doesn't quite hold up. I'd also, to the extent that we want to go back to Caban, I do want to just make a couple quick things clear. Caban was not a facial challenge. It wasn't. And neither was some of the First Amendment cases they were talking about weren't equal protection First Amendment cases. They were commercial speech cases. Michael M. also wasn't a facial challenge. He wasn't saying I should have an exception because a prepubertal girl was involved. He was saying the statute is overbroad because in theory it could apply to a prepubertal girl. So I do think that some of the characterization of the cases doesn't hold up to our reading of them.
So how does a Caban type as applied intermediate scrutiny analysis work in your view? It is an underdeveloped area of the law. Is it enough for one person to show that she bucks the trend or not?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think I agree with my co-counsel that I think we're talking about a discrete, definable group that will reliably not serve the government's interest. And I don't think Nguyen is a counterpoint to that, because the whole point in Nguyen was that men who were not similarly situated had an opportunity to demonstrate that. There are 3 very easy methods of transmitting citizenship. And Nguyen emphasized that in order to do it, those were minimal burdens. And that is the key fact in Nguyen that distinguishes it from this case. This is a categorical ban. And Nguyen and Caban and all the court's cases distinguish between categorical bans and more narrow procedural requirements that do treat men and women differently, but still provide the opportunity for demonstrating that you're not similarly situated.
I think a hard question that Ms. Hartnett got, maybe the hardest question on these lines, was if we recognize these sorts of as-applied challenges, doesn't that effectively turn intermediate scrutiny into strict scrutiny?
Right.
What would your answer be to that? Would it be any different, or
No,
do you want to elaborate?
I think the answer is it absolutely wouldn't. You still are only looking for a substantial relationship, which means that you can have these sorts of requirements where there are a lot of under Caban and under Lair. There's still a lot of fathers that are out of luck, that they actually probably do have a good relationship with her kid, but they didn't fill out the right paperwork, they didn't do this, they didn't do that, and heightened scrutiny doesn't require that they be excused from those procedural burdens. So I do think that heightened scrutiny allows you to have procedural requirements that people have to go through, and those can be enforced. Strict scrutiny does not allow that. But that's different from saying that if the complete rationale for a classification just doesn't apply to you, that there's no equal protection claim you can bring. And some of it's complicated to talk about the difference between facial and as applied post-CASA, because I think a lot of the things that we called facial challenges now would be viewed as overbreadth challenges, right? Where someone is trying to say the law is so overbroad in general, it has to all be struck down. And we have that for First Amendment. I don't think we have that anymore for most equal protection claims. And so I think taking this facial as applied framework from before CASA, where we allowed these facial attacks on statutes, and then just transporting it into as applied cases post CASA doesn't necessarily work. I think some of the terminology might need to be rethought. And so, again, that's another reason why there's not a lot of precedent in this area, as several of you all have acknowledged. And that's another reason why I don't think this should be the case that makes that precedent when it's unnecessary to do so.
Thank you, counsel. Justice Thomas? Justice Alito? Justice Sotomayor?
Would you address a little bit the quantum of certainty or uncertainty that would have to exist in the science? Your co-counsel, or the counsel in the other case, said that if it's 50%, the state loses. But I'm always hesitant about these percentage cases because it's never qualitative. It's never quantitative, it's qualitative. So what do you think the qualitative standard is?
Well, I mean, to be clear, I don't actually think there's uncertainty in the case of someone who's had puberty blockers and then gender-affirming hormones. Our position is there's zero uncertainty. It's actually clearly in our favor. So but in general, I think it's hard to give, a quantitative answer to that. I think part of heightened scrutiny involves taking all of these factors into account. This court, has said on several occasions that heightened scrutiny can accommodate deference. And I honestly think it's a case-by-case decision that also looks at how harmful the classification is, how burdensome it is. I don't think you just look at the accuracy of the classification and add a number value for how certain we are that it's accurate. I think many other factors come into play.
Justice Kagan? No. Justice Gorsuch? Justice Barrett? Justice Jackson? Thank you, counsel. Rebuttal, Mr. Williams?
I think you've now heard respondent abandon the Fourth Circuit's logic on Title IX, and I think in many ways that makes this court's task that much easier. Congress authorized regulations allowing sex-separated athletics. West Virginia's definition of sex tracks the ordinary meaning in 1972 and 1974 and the regulatory framework that Congress endorsed. I think, Mr. Chief Justice, your question really highlighted how BPJ's approach unmoors the statute and the regulation under Title IX on the basis of sex. BPJ's test, in turn, begins to look more towards other characteristics that aren't on the basis of biological sex, and I think that's not consistent with what we see there. I also think the answer to Justice Barrett's question reflected how, under BPJ's theory, this really isn't about competitive advantage, that really what this does turn on is gender identity, because BPJ continues to maintain that a cisgender boy who continues to not have those same biological advantages would nevertheless still be kept off of the girls' sports team. So if you endorse that philosophy, that would require the court to hold that long-standing Title IX athletic regulations are unlawful. It would eliminate sex-separated athletics entirely, and I think it would defeat Title IX's core purpose of ensuring equal athletic opportunity for both sexes. On the equal protection side of the House, the question is whether the classification is substantially related to an important governmental interest. And I think that BPJ ultimately wants to rewrite the classification to be something that it is not. Biological sex substantially relates to athletic performance. That's exactly why, in fact, Title IX regulations authorize sex-separated teams in the first place. Respondent's test effectively ratchets up the intermediate scrutiny standard into a perfect fit, best disposition case that this court has repeatedly said is not the standard under intermediate scrutiny cases. That is the standard for strict scrutiny cases. You have heard it several times today. Justice Sotomayor, you asked about deference. I think this court has also repeatedly recognized that in areas of evolving science and medicine, especially involving children, legislatures have the primary responsibility for weighing competing evidence and making the policy judgments. I think the court just recently said that in Scrimeti, but I certainly don't think that case stands alone in recognizing that, especially when you have competing balances of harms, Justice Kavanaugh, when you're weighing these sorts of zero-sum games, that's a choice, that's a policy judgment that ultimately rests in the hands of the legislature. In the end, this court has, quote, recognized physical differences between men and women. They are enduring, and inherent differences.
All right, so back and forth at the Supreme Court as they continue to discuss this issue. Meanwhile, President Donald Trump has arrived at a vehicle plant in Detroit, Michigan. He appears to be speaking in front of a small assembled crowd. We're going to go live out to Detroit, listening to President Trump right now.
Around the clock. No, it will. So we're adding a third shift, and it's going to be running, as the president said, 24 hours, 6 days a week. And that just shows the demand there is for this product, which is the best-selling product, as you all know, in America. And it just gets hotter and hotter. So we have a great relationship with the president and his whole staff. They've been great to work with for us. He personally is incredibly responsive every time we need something or call. We very much appreciate it, and we couldn't be more excited. We're adding market share. We're growing as a company. We're adding jobs, not just here but elsewhere. Times are good for us.
And all of the U.S. automakers now are doing great, and before they were having a really hard time. You couldn't. The environmentalists would not have let them survive.
So, Mr. President, when you renegotiate USMCA, how is that going to help auto workers like Ford?
I don't even think about USMCA. I mean, I want to see Canada and Mexico do well, but the problem is we don't need their product. We don't need cars made in Canada. We don't need cars made in Mexico. We want to make them here. And that's what's happening. Everybody's moving here. From Canada, they're coming here. From Mexico, from Japan, from Germany, from all over the world. They're coming here. They're opening up their plants. Bill is lucky because he's had a lot here, but when he doesn't have it here, he's moving here. They're doing big expansions for it. but they're all doing great. The car industry is exciting, and to be honest with you, Bill, every industry is exciting.
Yeah.
Just like this.
Well, we need to rebuild our industrial base, and that's been a priority of yours.
And we're adding a combustion vehicle, a combustion truck, affordable one in Tennessee to the president's note. That's what these policies are doing for Ford. We're going to actually expand one of our existing plants and make a different kind of truck there.
The tariffs?
Yeah.
Tariffs?
Yes, and the EPA, the relief of the
tariffs and the relief I gave them from the most ridiculous standards. We had put 3 computers on a car in order to save about this much gasoline from a glass. It was crazy, but very proud of them. And Ford has really been a leader. They've done a great job. But all of them. General Motors is doing really well. Stellantis is doing really well. We're really happy about it. I just wanted to build their product in the USA.
You don't think you're going to renegotiate USMCA?
Well, I can. It expires very shortly.
Yeah.
And we could have it or not. It wouldn't matter to me. I think they want it. I don't really care about it.
So it might go away. So you're talking about getting rid of USMCA.
No real advantage to us. It's irrelevant to me. Canada would love it. Canada wants it. They need it. Because we don't need Canada product. That's the thing. You know, I want to be a nice person, but we don't need... I want to build the cars here, not in Canada. We used to build cars in Canada. Now, the Canada cars, the Canadians are moving here to build cars. Same thing with Mexico. Same thing with Japan. Japan's paid us billions and billions of dollars for the privilege of making cars here and selling cars.
What about the raw materials? Auto manufacturing.
The quality is unbelievable. So we're at a Ford 150 plant, and I don't know that much about cars, but I know how to get people working. And all I can tell you is that people talk so much about the 150, and it has been for a long time. They make a great product, a quality product, better than anybody else can make in Europe or in any other location. Look, the Ford 150 has done well for a long time because they make a great product.
Did you ever allow Chinese autos into the U.S.?
Well, as you know, we have a tariff on Chinese autos. And in Europe, China's taking over the auto business, I would say is a nice statement, but that's the way it is. And here, what is it, 100%? We have a 100% tariff on any car coming in from China. So that makes them able to do very nicely against China.
Mr. President, what
right?
about the...
Pretty good, right? Who would have thought that was going to happen, right?
What about the raw
Everybody
materials?
said that the cars are dead in the United States. If you go back 4 years ago into the middle of the Biden administration, everybody was closing up their plants. Now we have more plants being built in our country than at any time in history. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. And it's the election, November 5th, and it's other things, but it's also, I think, maybe the biggest part, the election, because I'm the tariff person. And everybody now admits that I was right on tariffs. And I hope that we win the Supreme Court case.
Mr. President, what about the raw materials coming in from countries like Canada? How do these companies deal with the fact that...
Well, we get it, but we have a lot of our own raw materials. And, you know, the word raw and rare are a little bit of a misnomer. They're not very rare. You have a lot of places that want to sell us material, and we get it from a lot of different countries. And we have a lot of rare earth and raw materials.
Senator Tom Tiller says that the subpoena, grand jury subpoena to the Federal Reserve Chairman was a little excessive. What do you think about that?
Well, that's why Tom's not going to be a senator any longer, I guess, right?
Well, what do you think?
But I like Tom Tiller. He's a nice guy. But look, he's not going to be a senator any longer because of views like that. We have a bad Fed chairman. He's bad in a lot of different ways, but he's bad because his interest rates were too high. And today we had a great inflation report. And today we had a really great growth report. So we have great growth and low inflation. And we're doing very well.
Do you think there's going to be a rate cut, though, with the inflation?
I don't know. With this guy, you don't know. He's got some problems. But what he also did, he's renovating a small building. It's the most expensive construction job in history, and it's only a renovation. I could have done that job for $25 million. They're spending billions and billions of dollars. He either doesn't know what he's doing, or it's worse than that. And you know what I mean by what. So hopefully he'll be out of there soon.
Does the president impact
No.
When do you expect to do that now?
I don't know, sometime in the next few weeks.
Are you getting closer?
Of the big three, Ford makes most of its products right here in the
80%.
United States. 80%.
That's a big advantage for Ford.
Is that the reason that you came here?
No, I came here because we're friends, three of us, because I have helped the company a lot. I mean, as an example, trucks. I put a 25% tariff on trucks coming into the United States, and their truck business went through the roof.
You said to Iran this morning that help is on the way for protesters. What did you mean by that? What kind of help?
You're going to have to figure that one out. I'm sorry.
How many people have been killed in Iran?
Nobody's been able to give me an accurate number. I have heard numbers from everything's a lot. One is a lot. But I've heard numbers much lower, and I've heard numbers much higher. We'll be knowing. We're probably going to find out over the next 24 hours. I think it's a lot.
In your first
It's too many, whatever.
oil average around $53 a barrel. Is that the target for you for this term?
I'd love to see that, yeah. I mean, we're at 68. We're at 58 now. I'd like to see 53. Thank you very much. I would say they could. It's not a bad idea. I think they should get out.
Mr. President, this is the basketball game. This is the team. How are you doing, Mr. Trump?
All right, President Donald Trump at a Ford factory in Detroit speaking about manufacturing in the United States and a few other topics. We actually want to touch on a few other topics that revolve around the Trump administration. Just give some updates on some stories that we especially covered yesterday, but that we've been covering for some time. Of course, unrest continues in Minneapolis following the an ICE officer shooting and killing Renee Good in her own vehicle last Wednesday. Protests continue in Minneapolis, and more Border Patrol authorities have also been sent to Minneapolis as the unrest increases. We also want to note that the state of Minnesota and the cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul have filed lawsuits against the Department of Homeland Security. They want to, quote, end the unlawful, unprecedented surge of federal law enforcement agents into Minnesota, saying that the targeting of Minnesota has been unconstitutional. In addition, the state of Illinois and the city of Chicago also suing the Trump administration. They allege that the deployment of Border Patrol is a violation of the 10th Amendment. Now, these two lawsuits come. Minneapolis obviously is in the midst of this issue right now, but if you remember, in late 2025, Chicago was the city that the Trump administration appeared to be targeting with an increase in Border Patrol agents and Border Patrol authorities and ICE agents, more being sent into the city of Chicago. There were instances of controversy as they attempted to assert their authority in Chicago. So the state of Illinois and the city of Chicago also filing a lawsuit in addition to Minnesota and Minneapolis and St. Paul. Now, the Trump administration is also ending temporary protective status for Somalia. Secretary Kristi Noem of the Department of Homeland Security tells ABC in a statement that they are ending that TPS for Somalia, TPS, that temporary protective status. Now, Somali immigrants with temporary protective status will be required to leave the country by March 17th. And as we have discussed, Minneapolis is home to the largest Somali American population in the United States. Now, even before this most recent tragedy that we saw in Minneapolis, the Trump administration was, and President Donald Trump himself was vocal in his targeting of the Somali population in Minnesota. So that is your update on the city of Minneapolis for today, and I'm sure more will continue to come throughout the weeks. And again, protests continue, and the increase in the amount of border authorities being sent to Minnesota also reported to have grown in recent days. Now, the other major story that we talked about yesterday involving the Trump administration is that around the Federal Reserve, that revolving around Chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, and him stating in a video that the the federal government has started a criminal investigation into him based around testimony that he made regarding the construction of the new Federal Reserve building that is being worked on right now. Now, Axios is reporting that Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent told President Trump late on Sunday that investigations into the Fed chair, quote, made a mess and could be bad for financial markets. However, a Treasury spokesperson said that there is zero daylight between the Secretary and President Trump, and that sources in this story do not speak for the Secretary. So that story continues to evolve. We heard from North Carolina Representative Tom Tillis via his X account in regards to the investigation into Jerome Powell yesterday. And of course, we listened to Chairman Jerome Powell's comments in their entirety. So that, another story that continues as we move throughout the week. Updates on both of those stories in their relation to the federal government after hearing from President Donald Trump at that Ford factory in Detroit just a few minutes ago. Now, we do have a live event happening right now. It involves possibly the defining metropolis of the United States of America. Just up the road in the Northeast, New York City, Governor Kathy Hochul is at the podium giving the state of the state. We've seen a number of these throughout recent weeks as the new year starts, governors giving a State of the Union about their state. And Governor Kathy Hochul is giving one as we speak right now in New York. And actually, just before we pulled up our live look here, we saw Attorney General Letitia James sitting in the crowd, someone who has obviously been in the news here in Hampton Roads towards the end of 2025. So let's go and take a live listen for a brief moment on Governor Kathy Hochul as she gives the state of the state for New York.
As we head into 2026, we are seeing the results. Clean hydropower for the first time flowing from Quebec to over 1 million homes in New York City. Long-stalled housing projects finally rising from the ground. A new stadium bringing pride and investment to Western New York. Go Bills! Now, you're all allowed to say go Bills. Thank you. Okay. See, I'm trying to unite downstate and upstate. This is the best thing I've got, right? We also have the brand new Belmont Park carrying racing into the future. The World Cup, drawing soccer fans from around the globe. They're coming here. And critical infrastructure is finally being rebuilt, from the Port Authority bus terminal to our bridges and tunnels, to expanding the 2nd Avenue subway even further. And the Interborough Express will connect Queens and Brooklyn like never before. It's all moving forward in 2026. Even the renovations at Penn Station that I got the president to finally focus on and pay for, long dreamed about, are on a path forward. Also, families will get a little more breathing room with another minimum wage hike, better paid family leave, a child tax credit up to $1,000 per child under the age of 4. And let me say this. We have the lowest middle-class tax rates in 70 years. Let me repeat that, the lowest in 70 years. And we lifted a major burden that was on businesses by paying off billions of dollars in unemployment insurance debt, while increasing the benefits by 70%. Now, this is a critical safety net for anyone who finds themselves out of work. Well, what else can we look forward to in 2026? World-renowned companies are reinvigorating communities that were overlooked for too long. Look what's coming. Micron in Onondaga County, shovels in the ground. Now, not 3 years from now, 3 days from now, shovels are going in the ground. Micron is happening. Fairlife in Monroe County, Chobani in Oneida County. These wins are the results of fights we took on, investments we made, and a future we chose together. And when I say together, That means my great partners in state government, but also means the local leaders who work around the clock, keeping our towns and our cities running. Let's hear from a few of them.
We are New York.
We are New York.
We are New York.
We.
Okay, so a brief look in on the state of the state. There you see Zohran Mamdani on your screen, the recently elected mayor of New York City. Now, we are going to make sure that we go back to Washington, D.C., because we were listening to arguments in the Supreme Court regarding the current case that the court is hearing about trans girls participating in sports that are consistent with their gender identity, okay? We were listening in on those arguments. We listened yesterday as we heard a press conference from attorneys generals of GOP states, or GOP attorneys generals of various states is a better order for that sentence. Now we are going to go live to just outside the courthouse where a press conference is currently happening regarding that case that the Supreme Court has been hearing today. Let's go ahead and take that live in Washington, D.C.
Fairness for women's sports. I am so proud to be from Idaho, and I am so proud of West Virginia for standing up for the rights of women and girls, specifically the Attorney General Labrador and Attorney General McCuskey. Idaho's law protecting women's sports reflects reality. Men and women are different, whether some want to admit it or not. You can't change those differences by suppressing testosterone. Women don't join sports for a participation trophy. We want to win, we work to win, and we deserve a fair shot at winning that trophy and taking home a victory. I'll happily compete against challenging odds, but nobody should lose the race before it has started. We are hopeful that the court will see Idaho and West Virginia's laws for what they are, a respecter of biology, fairness, and women. Thank you.
Now we'll hear from Alliance Defending Freedom attorney John Bursch, and then we'll be open for questions after.
Hi everyone, I'm John Bursch. I'm with Alliance Defending Freedom. We had the honor of serving as co-counsel alongside Idaho and West Virginia in defense of their laws protecting women's sports. And we also intervened on behalf of the athletes that you just saw, Maddie Kenyon, Mary Kate Marshall, and Lainey Armstead, to ensure that their rights and the rights of girls nationwide are protected. And just, a side note here, even as trans activists are trying to throw these women out of their own sports and to take away their rights, you can hear that happening here today too. As soon as they tried to be at the microphone, the music started on the other side. They don't want these girls to be able to speak. They want to just erase them from society. Women deserve an equal opportunity for fairness and safety. Today, Idaho and West Virginia asked the Supreme Court to allow states to protect women's sports by affirming a basic truth. Women and men are biologically different. Yet today, the ACLU asked the court to make it impossible to define sex accurately. Identity does not determine your sex, and laws that distinguish between the sexes do not violate federal law when biological differences matter, like on the playing field and in the locker room. No drug can make a man into a woman. Puberty blockers and testosterone suppression do not erase the physical advantages males have over females. All athletes can compete, but they must do so on a level playing field. Now, you heard today that no one is being harmed by this. Justice Kavanaugh said that's not correct. Sports is a zero-sum game. Someone has to win, someone has to lose. In West Virginia, BPJ defeated more than 400 girls over 1,000 times, winning 57 medals that should have gone to female athletes. That's the real-world cost of ignoring biological reality. Over the last 50 years, under Title IX, women have made historic gains in rights and opportunity. Athletics teaches leadership, grit, discipline, teamwork, and so much more. 94% of women in the C-suite played sports, and we will not allow men to take roster spots, scholarships, and championships away from women. That's not progress. No girl should be sidelined in her own sport. No girl should be taught that safety is something she must surrender. Every girl deserves a real chance to compete and to win. Thank you. We're happy for your questions now. I can take the legal questions. The AGs are here as well. Yeah, questions.
How do you respond to the assertion today that in those cases where there's not a biological difference, based upon testing and other things, how do you account for that? And also, can you talk about why the laws are discriminatory in that they target trans women but also not trans men? What's the difference there?
Well, first, we categorically reject that there's no advantage. If you look at the Olympic race with Leah Thomas, Thomas suppressed testosterone for more than 2 years, and yet that didn't make a difference. He won a gold medal in the 500 meters and beat 2 former Olympians because the diminution in his athletic ability from testosterone wasn't enough to overcome the 9% gap between men and women in that sport, and that's true across all the sports. As far as the discrimination point, there isn't any discrimination when you distinguish based on biology, and if someone wants to challenge the example of girls being able to play in boys sports but not vice versa, they're able to do that. But that's not what this case is about. This is about making sure that women like these have the opportunity to compete and win in their own sports.
What's your reaction to Joshua Block saying sex should not be defined?
That's completely bizarre. I don't know how you can decide a case interpreting sex under Title IX and under the Equal Protection Clause by not defining sex. Sex, when Title IX was passed, meant biological sex. The entire statute is written with biological distinctions. It even refers to each of the sexes. I don't know how the court can do that. And it says a lot that he felt and the ACLU felt they had to tell the court not to define sex in order for them to survive this case. Well, we definitely think they heard our arguments, and I heard a lot of things that I was really encouraged about today. You heard Justice Sotomayor basically come out and say that she thinks that under the Title IX regulations that the West Virginia and Idaho laws are valid. That's an amazing accomplishment today. In addition, you heard Justice Kavanaugh talking about the zero-sum game, how it denies girls the right to compete and the right to win when we allow boys in their space. You heard Chief Justice Roberts say that this case is very different than Gorsuch, because when you're talking about sex distinctions, as in these sports laws, that is not discriminating against the LGBT community. So we heard a lot that we're thankful to hear today, and we hope that the court will uphold the right that girls can compete in their own sports fairly and safely. Other questions?
Where did you find out about the evidence about Lindsay Hecox not being able to graduate in May?
Boise State University is the university that Hecox attends. It's a client of Idaho. We asked, and the university confirmed that's unlikely to happen this spring.
What does it say that they tried to say that she would graduate in May?
Well, it just shows that throughout the case that Hecox has flipped back and forth with affidavits and statements to the court, and that's why the court should be very skeptical of the mootness argument in that case. They should decide it.
Barbara Ehart, who authored this legislation, said that even when she was writing it with help from ADF, that she expected this case to come to the Supreme Court. So the question is this all a manufactured affair? Is this the goal from the very beginning for us all to be here in a theater that was designed from the very beginning?
This was not manufactured, because from the beginning the concern was male athletes across the country identifying as women, many who had suppressed their testosterone, were winning gold medals in track and other events across the country. In addition to that, you had terrible injuries. In women's volleyball games, women were being concussed by male players. In women's basketball, there were women who were being driven off the court with injuries because of male athletes. In mixed martial arts, you had a woman who had her orbital bone broken because of a male athlete who identified as women. This was a response to real problems and refusing to recognize the biological distinctions that are inherent in athletic competition. There is nothing staged about this.
We have time for one more question.
There was some discussion about whether the issues should be left to the states or the national approach. Do you guys have any position on whether state by state, or what do you favor a national approach?
Well, we think that eventually Title IX will establish through additional litigation that it is a national approach. And you heard some of that today from some of the advocates, that under the regulations, states have two choices. They can have a co-ed team or they can have sex-based teams. When you have sex-based teams, but then you allow male to compete on the women's teams, that violates Title IX too. This is a solution or a problem that needs a national solution, because it can't be that boys should be allowed to beat female athletes in California and Massachusetts because they refuse to recognize biological distinctions while they're protected in 27 other states. Eventually, there will have to be a national solution to taking away women's opportunities.
Thank you guys so much for coming today.
You heard from them. Great job. Great job, man. I guess we can leave it. Yeah. Okay. Great job.
All right, so the conclusion of that press conference outside of the Supreme Court after arguments were heard today regarding this case. I'm just going to one more time kind of go over some of the baseline facts. I know we've been over this. Naya is working on pulling up some different videos from the ACLU that they have posted to their YouTube page, because we want to make sure that we're taking a look at every different side of this issue. We want to make sure that none of that is missed. It looks like it has been pulled up here. I'll just make sure that everybody has a foundation of what we're talking about. This is a Supreme Court hearing arguments on a pair of cases where federal courts have blocked state laws that would prohibit trans girls from competing on teams consistent with their gender identity. Those two states are Idaho and West Virginia. Those are the states where these cases are being heard. However, there are 27 states across the nation where there is bans in place, such as the ones that are in question during this particular Supreme Court hearing. Now, Lindsay Hecox in Idaho and Becky Pepper Jackson in West Virginia are the two athletes that we're talking about here, and there is CNN phrases this well in that they say a 6-3 conservative court has repeatedly sided against LGBTQ interests over the past 5 years, positioning this as Lindsay Hecox and Becky Pepper Jackson starting off with a disadvantage as they enter these Supreme Court hearings with their cases. But you also just heard that press conference outside the courthouse with athletes speaking, as well as other representatives who are looking to make sure that the states are able to put these bans in place if individual states so choose. So let's listen into some materials that we pulled up from the ACLU on YouTube here. Let's very briefly listen in. These are very quick videos, and then we'll be back here in the Live Impact News studio.
You're supposed. When you're young, you believe that you can do anything. And then the world tries to set limits for you.
Tell you what's allowed.
What's normal.
Who you're supposed to be.
But on the field, the track, the court, here, you get to be exactly who you are.
Because at our core, we're still the kids who just want to play.
The go big game changers.
The living, breathing fabric of this country.
Supporting trans youth isn't just about sports.
It's about freedom.
On and off the field. It's more than a game.
And it does look like another group has taken that same podium outside of the Supreme Court. The woman in the white clothing there to the right of the speakers, that's Becky Pepper Jackson of West Virginia, one of the athletes who has brought this challenge to the court. So let's listen into this group as they speak outside of the Supreme Court.
For all the support that has been shown for Becky over the past week. I think it's not easy for anyone to be a kid, and especially not easy to be a trans kid. And if it weren't for people like Becky and her mom, I think we'd all be in a very worse place right now. Do you want to say? You should introduce yourself.
Me?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Kathleen Hartnett, partner at Cooley Law Firm, and I was co-counsel in both cases. I argued today on behalf of Lindsay Hecox. I just want to say I'm proud to stand with this group and this amazing client and mother, and so many people that made this possible to tell the story of what's going on here. I think I was particularly proud today to be able to make sure that the court understood the serious history of discrimination the transgender community has faced, and I'm just so proud to stand by all of these colleagues as we try to help bring the truth to the debate and also just bring some justice here in the court. Thank you.
Karen?
Okay.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chase Strangio. I am co-counsel along with Kathleen and Josh, and I'm honored to be here representing BPJ and Lindsay Hecox before the Supreme Court. And The only thing I want to add is that in this moment, in so many halls of power, it feels like people are debating whether or not transgender people exist, whether or not we deserve protections under our Constitution and our civil rights statutes. And today in the Supreme Court, we were able to remind the 9 justices that we do exist, that we deserve protections just like everybody else, and that there has been a history of discrimination against us that warrants the court to take a closer look at the type of government targeting that we've seen over and over again from states and now from the federal government. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Karen Lowy. I am Senior Counsel and Director of Constitutional Law Practice at Lambda Legal, and I am so proud to have stood with my colleagues in representing BPJ and her mom. Today, we had a chance to explain to the court what it really means in concrete terms to deny a kid the opportunity to access all of the things we want our kids to be able to access as they grow and become fully realized adults simply because of who they are, simply because they are transgender. That equal opportunity for our kids to grow and thrive is what our laws and Constitution demand, and that is what we are all here to fight for and will continue to fight for, and we are grateful for the opportunity to make that case to the court today.
Thank you very much.
Kevin Jennings, I'm the CEO of Lambda Legal. We were proud to be co-counsel in Becky's case. What this is about is something I learned as a high school teacher 40 years ago. Every kid has a right to play. Every kid has a right to belong. Every kid has a right to be treated equally. Becky Pepper Jackson is an American hero because she stood up for millions of other kids today and said, we belong, we matter, we are equal. Thank you, Becky.
Thank you very much. What is your definition of sex?
I don't think that's what's at issue in this case. What's at issue in this case is fair treatment for all kids. Sorry. Oh yeah. I was just saying I don't think that's what is at issue in this case. What's at issue in this case is fair treatment for all people, including cis people and trans people, and that's what we're here to talk about today.
Why do you think thank you very much. In this case? Thank you very much. Sure.
Let's try again.
Okay, so both sides of this particular case now speaking outside of the Supreme Court over the last 15 minutes here. So again, as we say so often with these stories, a story that will continue and that we will continue to cover as it progresses. Now, with that being said, we move on to another topic because President Donald Trump has just taken the podium in Detroit. We saw him visiting the Ford factory earlier today. Now we go live out to Detroit as the president has taken the podium in front of a sizable crowd there. Naya said, let's go ahead, Connor. Let's get to the video.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. You are absolutely correct, Naya. No more time wasted. Let's head out to Detroit, Michigan.
We did good in Michigan, Matt. We won the whole thing in Michigan, didn't we? 3 times we won. You know that, right? They didn't give us credit the second time, but we won the second time. But we made the last one not too big to rig. Right? That's what you got. That's the only way you win races in many cases. I got to tell you, it's too bad. I think they should get voter ID. It wouldn't be nice. The Democrats are totally against voter ID. Who's against voter ID? How can you even campaign? We are against voter ID. How do you not get voter ID? You know what it means, Matt, right? When you're against voter ID, you want to cheat. So there's only one reason you want to cheat, and they do cheat. It's terrible. Michigan Senate Republican leader Eric Nesbitt. Thank you, Eric. Thank you. Look good, Eric. State Senator Jim Runstad. Jim, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Jim. Former Congressman Mike Rogers, who's running for the Senate, and he'll be a great senator. And he's going to be a great senator. He was a great congressman, and then he left and went on to very big things. He did well no matter where he was, and I think they took that away from you last time, I'll be honest with you, Mike. I really do. Don't like to get things going. I don't like to be controversial at all. But they rigged the election on you. Mine was too big to rig. You won, I'm telling you, you won, but you're going to do great this time. He's a great guy, actually. He's to be an amazing senator. Thank you for being here, Jim. Special Envoy to Iraq, Mark Savaya. Mark. Hi, Mark. Thank you. Great job you've done. This guy, he negotiates better than anybody around. Thank you. You need it. With Iraq, you need it. You need to be a good negotiator, Mark. I also want to thank Michigan's great congressional delegation. They're amazing. That's been back in Washington due to a very important vote that's coming up. They had a choice. Sir, we want to be with you, but if we're not with you, we're going to lose. But we'll still be with you. I said, no, I'd rather have you win. Don't worry about it. So we're going to win the vote. Representatives Lisa McClain, Jack Bergman, John Molinar, Bill Heisinger, Tim Walberg, John James, and Tom Barrett. They're great people, every one of them. And as many of you remember, I came here at the height of the 2024 campaign to lay out my plan to bring jobs and factories and wealth racing back to the United States and coming back to the great state of Michigan. And just a few weeks later, the people of this state and the voters all across the country endorsed that vision in a landslide victory. We won everything. We won all 7 swing states. We won the Electoral College 312 to 226. We won the popular vote by millions and millions of... Oh, it's so nice to win the popular vote. I won the popular vote all 3 times, too, but we're not going to get into that. But the first time they said I didn't win the popular vote, but I won the Electoral College. So they always said, while he didn't win, this is the way I got introduced every time. While he didn't win the popular vote, he won the Electoral College, you know. So this is the way I was introduced for 4 years. And guess what? We said, I'm going back, and we're going to win and we won the popular vote by a lot. So they can't say that crap anymore. And the thing that was most impressive, we won 86% of all counties in America, 2,700 to 525. Think of that, 2,700 to 525. And that's why when you look at the maps on Republican, Democrat, with red being Republican, as most of you know by now, I think, every once in a while you see one where they have it reversed. I said, why would we do that? Well, we think it looks better. I said, look, red is Republican. Let's not try and change the voters' minds on things. Just do it that way. And the map was virtually all right. That was about the counties. That was the 2,700 to 550, I think is the exact number. Most importantly, we won a historic mandate to make America great again. And that's what we're doing. We're making America great again like never before. And now, after less than 12 months in office, this is the easiest speech to make. I have great people, and all I'm doing is spewing off what the hell we've done. Even Venezuela wasn't too bad, was it, huh? But you have people, Democrats, they say, I don't know if we should have done Venezuela, I don't know. Anybody that says that hates our country, okay? That was as flawless an attack as there has ever been. And they asked us to help them. They have 50 million barrels of oil. They said, take it. It's $5 billion. And we did. We're working with the Venezuelan people and representatives, and it's amazing. But that was an amazing situation. But we did al-Baghdadi, flawless. We did Soleimani, flawless. We did the Iran nuclear attack where we wiped out their nuclear capacity, which would have been very bad. You wouldn't have peace in the Middle East, flawless. We did them all flawless. I want to keep it going that way, too. I like flawless. Think about Jimmy Carter, the great Jimmy Carter, with the helicopters crashing, the hostages all over the place. Remember that one? Think about Sleepy Joe Biden with Afghanistan. What a disaster. The most embarrassing day in the history of our country, in my opinion. Real dope. Now, after less than 12 months in office, I'm back in Michigan to report to you on the strongest and fastest economic turnaround in our country's history. It's really been historic. There's never been, when we're not 12 months, we're through 11 months. We've got $18 trillion being invested in our country. The most of any country ever was 3. We're at 18. There's never been anything like this. You are so lucky I allow you into this room to even be with me. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. The fake news will say Donald Trump thinks he's hot stuff. Right now I'm feeling pretty good, though, I will say. Oh, you're so lucky to be here. Under our administration, growth is exploding, productivity is soaring, investment is booming, incomes are rising, inflation is defeated, America is respected again like never before. And other than that, we're not doing that well. Now, think of all those things I just said. Every single inflation down, growth at an all-time high, stock market every day, 48 days in a row, 48 days during the course of 11 months, we hit a new high on the stock market, all of them. 1 year ago, we were a dead country. Now we are the hottest country anywhere in the world. That was said to me by many leaders. By almost every metric, we have quickly gone from the worst numbers on record to the best and strongest numbers, the most dynamic numbers, and an economy that is far ahead of even my optimistic. I had a very optimistic schedule, I thought. I didn't think it was, but people said it was very optimistic. Turns out to be very pessimistic by compared to what we've done. But we'll go down as the greatest in history, greatest first year in history nobody's ever had, just based on the numbers, based only on the numbers, not based on me, based only on the numbers. Because, you know, you get these guys like the governor of California likes to say how well he's doing. California's doing horrendously, but he says how well. We base it on numbers. There's never been numbers like this. Through 4 long years before I took office, crooked Joe Biden and his allies in Congress inflicted the economic nightmare known as stagflation. How many times have you heard the word? We hit it with Joe. We hit everything. What a disaster. Meaning low growth and high inflation. How does that work? Not good. So you have lousy growth and high inflation. In fact, it's the lowest growth ever and the worst inflation in the history of our country. That is really tantamount to not having a good 4 years, right? In other words, Sleepy Joe and the people that ran the auto pen were a complete and total disaster for our nation. They were a disaster for our nation. Had they won the election less than 1 year ago, we would have been, as I've often said, Venezuela on steroids. Now I'm Venezuela's biggest fan. We're working with them, but they came down from a very high number to a disaster, a disaster. And we would have been Venezuela on steroids, and we're bringing Venezuela back, and we're going to be great for Venezuela, great for our country. We're taking in, as I said, millions and millions of barrels of oil, and now they're coming in initially on a daily basis, 50 million, and values of over $5 billion. That's in 1 day. Just think of it, the biggest ships in the world can take 1 million barrels. The biggest ships in the world take 1 million. We have 50 million barrels. We need 50 of the biggest ships in the world just to get it out. We're bringing it in to be refined. It's an incredible feeling. It's great. Winning is a good thing. We're going to work with Venezuela. We'll make that country very strong again. We'll get oil prices down even further. We have it down at about a 6-year low, 7-year low, but we're going to get it down further. Joe Biden gave us a colossal stagflation catastrophe, but my administration's rapidly and very decisively ended that. We have quickly achieved the exact opposite of stagflation, almost no inflation and super high growth. So we have the highest growth we've ever had. Think of that. The highest growth we've ever had, and we've only been there 11 months. Think of what we can do for the rest of it. But do we have wood around here? I want to knock on a little wood. They have one little, everything's plastic nowadays. It's very tough. Now we have the greatest growth, and we have, inflation way, way down. But we inherited terrible growth, and we inherited the worst inflation in the history of our country. The fake news would say 49 years. So when I say the history, they give me a lot of time, but I believe it's the history. But let's say 49 years. Would you say 49 years is okay, right? It's pretty bad. What do you think, Mr. Senator, Mr. Future Senator? I'd say 49. What sounds worse, 49 years or history? I think 49 years almost sounds worse. Maybe I'll just use it and I won't argue with these people. As of this morning, core inflation for the past 3 months has been just 1.6%. The numbers were just announced just before I came on stage. And GDP is smashing expectations with the fastest growth for this country in many years. The fourth quarter is projected at 5.4%, and that's despite the Democrat shutdown where we lost at least 1.5 points. The Democrat shutdown, we would have had close to 7. Think of that, close to 7 they were projecting to. The fakers were projecting to. And if we keep deregulating and adding more capacity, like I saw today at Ford, And if we don't raise interest rates every time good news is mentioned, in the old days, I'm probably old. I used to be up at these lecterns and I'd say, I'm younger than pretty much everybody in the room. Now I say I'm older than pretty much everybody in the room. I like it the other way better, actually. But you're too young. But in the old days, when you had good numbers, interest rates would go down. When you had good numbers, the market would go through the roof. That's the way we're going to make it again. That's the old-fashioned way. That's the right way. Today, if you announce great numbers, they raise interest rates to try and kill it. So you can never really have the kind of rally you should have. What happens and what we want, we're going to have a lot of great months, a lot of great quarters. I want the market to go up. You announce unbelievable numbers and the market goes down because they know you're going to do everything possible. In the Fed, we have a real stiff in the Fed, but that's for another day. But they raise rates. So everyone says, oh, they announced great numbers. It's great, great, great. And the market goes down because they immediately raise rates. No. When the market goes up, they should lower rates. You want to see 20% and 25%? You want to see what we can do? We've got to go back to an old standard. When there's good news, the market should go up, not go down. Does that make sense to everybody? And that's the way it used to be for most of the time. That's the way you make a country great. But our growth potential is unlimited and could be much higher if we went back to sanity. We're not doing it anymore. We're talking about the head of the Fed, and I want somebody that when the market is doing great, interest rates can go down because our country becomes stronger. See, you view it differently. Our country becomes stronger, and therefore interest rates should go down, not up. They kill every rally. If it's, no matter who, if it's beyond me as president, it's no matter who's president. You have a good quarter, and they want to kill it because they're so petrified of inflation. And growth and inflation don't necessarily go hand in hand. You can have growth and very low inflation. In fact, oftentimes growth is good for low inflation. So we're going to work on that, Scott, right? I think we're going to work on that very hard. I mean it so strongly. It's sickening. We announce good numbers and we see the stock market drops 300 points. I say, what the hell is going on? Do you agree with me? It should be just the opposite. All right, Scott agrees, so I'm very happy about this. That means if he didn't agree, I wouldn't do it. But we're already growing double, triple, and even quadruple the speed of almost every other major economy on earth. We're the #1 economy on earth, too. And the results are in, and the Trump economic boom is officially begun. It's really begun almost from the beginning. Almost begun, if you look at it, really from November 5th. On another metric, just before the election, it was almost impossible to get people to join the military. We had the worst enlistment in the history of our country, the worst. You couldn't get people for the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, Space Force, the Coast Guard. You couldn't get people. And since right after the election, but especially since after January 20th when we took office, we have now the strongest enlistment we've ever had in the history of our country. We've never enlisted people so quickly, so easily. And we enlist by merit now. We won a Supreme Court case that said you hire by merit. You go to college now by merit. Everything's by merit. Our country became great because of merit. And we have done some job. But think of it, a year and a half ago, we had the worst enlistment in history, and now we have the best enlistment. Things like that don't happen. You might go from the bad enlistment to okay, but you don't go from the worst in history to the best in history. But that's what we've done, every one of them. And that includes police and firefighters. It was very hard to get police. It was very hard to get firefighters, and now everybody wants those jobs. In 4 years of Biden, they secured less than $1 trillion of new investment in the United States. So 4 years, less than $1 trillion. In less than 1 year, I have secured commitments for over $18 trillion from all over the world, the most ever for any country. Think of that, though. They did, and I'll tell you what, had she won, it would be a disaster because you would have people leave. You would have not had $1 trillion. You would have had $5 trillion, $10 trillion leaving the country, and your welfare would have doubled. When you look at what's going on in Minnesota, is that a disgrace? Is that a disgrace? But we'll talk about that. Under Biden, We had the highest trade deficit ever recorded, losing more than $1 trillion every single year. How about that? It was killing Michigan, and everywhere else in our country was being absolutely destroyed. But in a matter of months, largely because of tariff income and the election result, we've slashed that gaping trade deficit by, in a short period of time, 62, it just came out, 62%. People are stunned. The fake news back there, look at those cameras rocking and rolling. No, the fake news back there is, they're very upset about it, actually. But they're stunned. They can't believe it. We cut our trade deficit in actually 10 months was when the number came out. We cut it by 62%. It's going to go better than that now. The stock market is now the highest in history since the election. We've set all of those records, and I think an all-time record that's so important to me because so many people have them is boosting 401ks and retirement accounts for millions and millions of Americans, people that are in the police departments, the fire departments, people that are construction workers. A policeman came up to
Okay, President Trump's remarks ongoing at the Ford factory in Detroit. For now, we are actually going to shift gears over to New York City, where there is a New York State Nurses Association strike happening as we speak. Let's go live out to New York and listen in to the Nurses Association.
Our unit has already experienced aggressive union busting, which our colleagues have already shared. Over the weekend, we were unfairly disciplined by management who falsely accused us of interfering with the work of their expensive temporary travel nurse brought to replace us and who were coerced. We were coerced in training.
Although management brought in these temporary travel nurses to undermine our union power, our patients are always our top priority, and we would never compromise patient safety. We will not be bullied by...
Okay, so only a brief look in at the New York State Nurses Association strike because the Progressive Caucus has taken the podium in Washington, D.C. As you can see, the speakers there on the bottom of your screen, Representative Ilhan Omar from Minnesota. However, to the left of Ilhan Omar, in terms of us facing the screen, is also a picture of Renee Good, the 37-year-old woman who was killed by an ICE agent last Wednesday in Minnesota. So let's go live out to the Progressive Caucus right now.
At you. Those are the words of someone attempting to de-escalate, not someone posing a lethal threat. After the shots were fired, the agent is heard saying, "Fucking bitch." This did not happen in isolation. This was not an accident, and it was certainly not inevitable. This killing is the direct consequence of deliberate choices made by Donald Trump and his administration. Over the last few months, the president has repeatedly inflamed tensions, espoused hateful rhetoric, and intensified attacks on Minnesotans, especially the Somali community. ICE's increasingly violent actions have terrorized our state and culminated in this needless loss of life. This is what happens when you give people with guns impunity. dangerous things take place. To be clear, demanding accountability is not radical. Calling for systematic reforms are not extreme. This is the bare minimum required to restore safety and justice back to our communities. The American people deserve answers and accountability. They deserve to live without fear of federal agents acting as judge, jury, and executioner in our streets. And so today, I am glad to announce that the Congressional Progressive Caucus has adopted an official position to hold ICE accountable. Our caucus members will oppose all funding for immigration enforcement in any appropriation bills until meaningful reforms are enacted to end militarized policing practices. We cannot and we should not continue to fund agencies that operate with impunity, that escalate violence, and that undermine the very freedoms this country claims to uphold. ICE has no place in terrorizing Minneapolis or any American community. Together, we will stand united to ensure we put a check on the pattern of violence and lawlessness from this administration. Next, I want to introduce our whip, Congressman Chuy Garcia.
Thank you. As the whip of the Progressive Caucus, I am pleased to announce that our caucus has voted to oppose any appropriation to ICE and Customs and Border Patrol unless specific reforms are met. We believe in dignity, in justice, and accountability. ICE has acted lawlessly and recklessly for decades. It's only now that we have videos and the evidence. This isn't a new development, but now the problem has been supercharged. Led by Republicans, Congress has signed off on tens of billions of dollars for the agency. And just last year, Republicans gave DHS $170 billion for border and interior enforcement in the big ugly bill, including $75 billion to ICE. Since then, ICE and other DHS agencies have doubled down on brutal, targeted enforcement programs. They've tear-gassed children. They've ripped families apart. They've disappeared and detained lawful permanent residents and U.S. citizens. They killed Silverio Villegas Gonzalez and shot Marimar Martinez 5 times in Chicago, in my district, within just a few days. And they killed Renee Nicole Good last week in Minneapolis. This is what happens when we give a bottomless pit of money to the Trump administration, which prefers death and destruction to the health, safety, and well-being of our communities. I represent a community that's been one of the epicenters of terror, as Minneapolis is today, and brutally unleashed by ICE and CBP. A community that could use those $75 billion for health care, for housing and education. With $75 billion, we could make a meaningful difference in the lives of millions who are struggling with insurmountable costs of living. Programs to provide housing to families, child care for 6 million children nationwide, 2 years worth of Pell Grants for low-income students. So today, I'm proud to stand in strong support of the position that our caucus has elected to adopt, rejecting unaccountable funding to ICE and CBP. And I also encourage all members, Republican and Democrat, to join us in voting no against the weaponization and the militarization of the government against our communities. Vote no on government cover-ups and lies. No to giving more money to Kristi Noem and other DHS officials who spit in the face of congressional authority and public accountability. No to using taxpayers to fund terror, trauma, and death in our communities. No más. Insto a todos los miembros republicanos y demócratas a que se unan a nuestra bancada para votar no en contra del uso de las Fuerzas Armadas y la militarización del gobierno contra nuestras comunidades. Vote no contra los encubrimientos y las mentiras del gobierno, no a darle más dinero a Kristi Noem y a los otros funcionarios del Departamento de Seguridad Nacional que desprecian la autoridad del Congreso y la rendición de cuentas ante el público. No al usar de dinero de las contribuyentes para financiar el terror, el trauma y la muerte en nuestras comunidades. Ya basta. Next, I would like to introduce the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Immigration of the Judiciary Committee, Pramila Jayapal.
Thank you so much, Representative Garcia, and thank you so much, Chair Omar, for your incredible leadership and courage in this moment, and to all of the members of the Progressive Caucus for taking a very strong, bold, and necessary position on appropriations. We cannot continue with business as usual as immigration agents tear gas peaceful protesters, ram down the doors of residents in Minnesota and across the country, as they round up U.S. citizens, as they strip our rights one by one. Last week, we all watched in horror as an ICE agent killed Renee Nicole Good in the streets of Minneapolis. She is not the first person to die at the hands of a rogue agency. And nothing we say or do can bring back Renee or any of these other individuals. But we can demand change in their memory. We have to urgently pass legislation to roll back the excessive funding for immigration enforcement that was in the Republicans' Big Bad Betrayal bill. And we cannot support additional funding for the Department of Homeland Security without seriously meaningful and significant reforms to the way that federal authorities conduct activity in our cities, our communities, and our neighborhoods. No more masked agents. No more ramming down our neighbors' doors without a warrant. No more threatening and intimidating the American people from exercising their First Amendment rights. They must end detention abuses by immediately ceasing the use of private for-profit detention centers. 35 people have already died in ICE custody just since Donald Trump came in. As the ranking member of the Immigration Subcommittee, I get a notice every time an official death, and that's just the official deaths, are recorded. And there are reports that people are being forced to sleep on the floor with cockroaches, fed food with maggots in it, and had medical care withheld. Anything for these private facilities to save a buck. And there must be independent investigations of lawlessness and violence by immigration agents and Border Patrol agents, and meaningful consequences for those who commit these acts of violence. Not a slap on the wrist, no impunity given to these officers to do whatever they want on our streets and just sent back out into the streets. This Friday, we will be conducting our 6th hearing of the Immigration Subcommittee Democrats in Minneapolis, St. Paul, with Representative Omar and the Minnesota delegation. And we will hear from people who have been directly impacted, and we will continue to demand accountability, because that is the thing that the American people want, and it is absolutely what we must do today. With that, let me introduce the incredible representative from the state of Illinois, Representative Delia Ramirez.
Thank you, Congresswoman. You know, as you're hearing my colleagues talk about what's happening in the streets, I really want to encourage you not to normalize this moment. You've heard a lot of what's happening over and over and over. And it's really easy for you to hear abduction, kidnapping, killing, beating, dying in detention. And if you hear it so much, at some point, perhaps, it may feel normal. None of this is normal. It's unconscionable. For the last year, Chicagoans and our neighbors across the country have been dragged, disappeared, beaten, abused, kidnapped, shot, murdered in front of their very own loved ones. And as Americans watch the violence and the indignity on their phones, on television, they've come to understand what so many of us already know, that the Department of Homeland Security is a threat to our collective safety. But I want to be clear. What is happening today in our communities, whether it's Minneapolis, Chicago, Oregon, North Carolina, LA, New York, New Orleans, and the list goes on, it's not an accident, nor is it new. You may be surprised by what I'm about to say, but DHS immigration agents, they're not rogue. Why? Because from its establishment, DHS and ICE has been empowered through a lack of oversight and too much latitude to violate our rights under the pretense of security and safety. Who is feeling secure and safe right now under the Department of Homeland Security? On January 7th in Minneapolis, Americans saw the danger of infusing unlimited resources into DHS's abuses of power. ICE shot U.S. citizen Renee Nicole Good in the face. But many of us have been talking about what's happening for a very long time. And we knew that unfortunately, at some moment, we would be here today, heartbroken and devastated, watching the number of people dying under DHS. So now we've plainly seen what they do with unlimited resources and unchecked power. Funding ICE only fuels our own destruction. We cannot assure our security by sacrificing our humanity, our dignity, our liberty. So what can we do? You've heard from my colleagues already. How do we protect our Constitution? We have to use Congress, appropriations power, to hold DHS accountable. Yes, and that means we must oppose new investments and demand policy change and reforms. It means we're not voting on a DHS package without any reforms, significant reforms. But I want to go further. We have to also impeach Kristi Noem. I want to go further than that. We need to prosecute the criminals in masks. We need to cut and claw back ICE's funding as natural consequences for DHS's disregard for the rule of law and violations of our rights. We have to use every single tool, including the power of the purse, to end the campaign of terror, because we brought ICE into this world. And we have a responsibility to decide what we do with it after. Let me just say a few added words in Spanish. Lo más importante que tiene que escuchar nuestra gente es que el caucus congresional progresista, aquí con nosotros, ha decidido tomar una posición muy formal. Como no pueden imaginarse, el Departamento de Seguridad Nacional quiere más dinero para secuestrar a nuestra gente, para matar a nuestra gente en las calles, para meterlos en cárceles, mandarlos a El Salvador y a otras partes del mundo. El Congreso aquí, el caucus progresista congresional, ha decidido que no votaremos por ninguna legislación que tenga más dinero para ICE, para el Departamento de Seguridad Nacional, que incluye también CBP, si no vemos reformas con contabilidad que sea en verdad concreto. Es muy importante que en este momento usemos todo lo que tenemos en nuestro poder para hacerlos a ellos contable, y con este grupo aquí lo haremos. Muchas gracias. Con eso es mi gusto introducir. It is my pleasure to introduce to you. I'm Spanglishing it right now. I know the president will love that. The one, the only, our champion for immigrant rights in Florida, Maxwell Frost.
Thank you so much, Delia. Good afternoon. I'm Congressman Maxwell Alejandro Frost. I represent Central Florida in my town of Orlando here in Washington, D.C. Today, I want to speak about the choices Congress faces in the upcoming appropriations bills, the responsibility that we have on funding decisions that we make. And I'm very proud of the Congressional Progressive Caucus for taking this principled stance, because the one thing that we can do that no one else in the communities that we represent can do is walk onto that House floor and cast the ballot and cast the vote. And what we vote for and what we vote against is a true reflection of not just our character, but also our priorities and what we believe needs to happen in this moment. And as we see these videos and these accounts, as we see ICE in our community terrorizing our people, kidnapping Americans, human trafficking people across the entire world, our position is simple. We will not fund that. We say no to funding for any DHS appropriations bill as long as our people will continue to be killed in detention facilities, on our streets, in our communities, as long as this lawlessness continues. And this position is grounded in the reality of what's happening right now. 32 people have died in ICE custody in 2025. In 2025 alone. The agency's deadliest year in more than 2 decades. And in case after case, families and attorneys pleaded for basic medical care. Their loved ones died after being denied the treatment that they needed. In December alone, 6 people died in detention facilities. The pattern is accelerating, not improving. And just last week, Renee Nicole Good was shot, killed, murdered by an ICE agent in Minneapolis. She was a mother, a partner, a neighbor, a poet, a member of her community, and her death was preventable, and it should have never happened. Our nation is at a critical inflection point. When immigration enforcement results in the loss of life, whether in a detention facility or in our communities, it exposes deep failure in oversight, use of force standards, and accountability mechanisms. Congress cannot look away. Continuing to write blank checks without demanding change only will allow these tragedies to continue, and to be honest, it also means that we are complicit. That is why we are calling for clear, enforceable guardrails, stronger limits on the use of force, independent investigation when harms occur. We cannot depend on this administration to police themselves, and an end to the enforcement practices that are terrorizing our communities. People should not be afraid to go to work, to take their kids to school, or to simply live in their own neighborhoods because of how immigration enforcement is carried out. But I'll be honest, without us doing this, we cannot depend on this administration to do anything. I mean, hell, if they didn't care when gunmen walked into our elementary schools and murdered children on the floor in cold blood as they were there to learn, why the hell would they care about Renee Good? If they don't care when people go into our synagogues and our temples, when people go into our churches and murder our people in the middle of the street just so the gun lobby can make more money, why would they care about the United States government doing the same thing to our people? That is why Congress must assert itself and step up. And the last thing I have to bring up is just the callousness of our leadership in the White House right now. That no matter what your political beliefs are, that an American died. She was murdered. Need I say executed by a federal agent who looked her in the face, looked her in the eyes, and then shot her in the face. And as her car turned into a casket and rolled away uncontrollably and hit a pole, he called her a fucking bitch. And then the president and the vice president and Kristi Noem take to social media, take to their podiums to tell the country that she's a domestic terrorist. And then my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have the audacity to take to social media, to take to the oversight committee to say, well, hold up. We got to let the process play out to know what happened. Trying to gaslight us from what we saw with our very eyes. Of course, everybody deserves due process. You know who didn't get due process? Renee Nicole Good. She didn't get a shred of due process before she was murdered and executed by an ICE officer who obviously wanted to do her harm because he was mad, because he was angry, and he had a gun. And he used that gun to murder an American and a human. There is no leadership in this nation right now. It is a very dark moment. And I'm not going to hold my breath waiting for this administration to do the right thing. And so I'm proud of the Congressional Progressive Caucus for taking a very principled stand to say that we are not going to be complicit in the killing of our people, in the terrorizing of our communities, and we're going to do something about it. Without further ado, let me bring up my colleague, Representative Maxine Dexter.
Thank you all for being here and shining a light on this critical issue at a pivotal moment in our nation's history. I'm proud to stand here with my Congressional Progressive Caucus. I am Maxine Dexter. I am a mother, a physician, and very proud U.S. Representative for Oregon's 3rd Congressional District. Details are still emerging, but one thing is absolutely clear. When any law enforcement officer fires a weapon in any community,
The public must have answers to questions. They must have accountability and transparency. Transparency cannot be optional. Accountability cannot be optional. And due process is not just not optional, it is foundational to the priorities of our nation, to the principles of our country. There was a time when the American people could trust the federal government. We could believe that they were upholding principles and our laws, and that they would share information based on facts, not spin or propaganda. That time has passed, folks. That's why I'm grateful to Oregon's Attorney General, who has launched an independent investigation to gather facts without political interference. This independent investigation is so critical because, as you have heard, there's a disturbing pattern across this country, from Portland to Minneapolis to Chicago, where masked federal agents act without fear of being accountable to the law. This impunity, this type of conduct, has led to U.S. citizens being detained and assaulted. It's led to wrongful deportations. And last week in Minneapolis, it led to the murder of a mother and a poet, Renee Nicole Good. We are here to say this is not normal. We are taking a stand against it, and we will stand against anyone who will not abide by the laws and the principles of our nation. The Congressional Progressive Caucus will oppose any appropriations bill that funds immigration enforcement without meaningful and actionable reforms that ensure transparency and accountability to the law. No blank checks, no business as usual. It is horrific that I must say this in the year 2026, but I will every single day until it is reality. Our communities deserve a federal government that is accountable to the law, that is committed to keeping them safe, that won't murder them in cold blood. Nothing else will do. Thank you. I yield back now to our Deputy Chief or Director. Oh, sorry.
Or something or
okay.
other.
Go ahead.
I'd like to open it up for questions, and Ryan from NBC was first person to ask to. So please.
Yeah, Kyle from NBC.
I don't see Ryan.
I wanted to ask, have you had a chance to talk to Leader Jeffries yet about this position from the Progressive Caucus? Also, do you have confidence you'll be able to keep the full Democratic caucus united against DHS funding?
We have had the opportunity to dialogue with him and with Democratic leadership. Democratic leadership understands what is going on. They are very concerned, and they also share our sentiment that we need to do something to bring reform, to bring change, to stop the lawlessness, the cruelty, and the abuse of power that's taking place within ICE and CBP and DHS. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Garcia. I'm curious, many of you talk about needing significant reforms in order to support a DHS funding bill. I'm curious if you can add some specificity behind what, are there any specific provisions that are red lines that if you all don't see them, I'm just looking to get some clarity on what you all mean by.
I'd like to start with ranking member of our Judiciary Committee, talk about that.
Thank you. The Immigration Subcommittee, Democrats, we have been putting together a list of what constitutes meaningful reforms. Some of them you may have heard of, some of them you may not have, but obviously things like not wearing masks, requiring a warrant for an arrest, the private detention facilities, the issues that we've been seeing with the federal government not sharing information with state law enforcement officials around independent investigations for accountability. So there are a number of things that we have identified that have that are really all critically important because the abuses are so widespread and occur in so many different places. We have to address all of them. And I think I think it is important for us to understand that one small fix to some meaningless provision is not constitute serious accountability. And I will say that the Judiciary Committee and Representative Garcia, critical member of that committee, we have turned, this is our second hearing, I'm going to go back right now, in Judiciary that has become a hearing on Minnesota, because every bill that they try to bring forward has nothing to do with the real issues that we are dealing with, but we have forced the Republicans on the committee, because every Democratic member has stood up and said, how can you watch this? We have played the videos. We've done frame-by-frame analysis. We are not going to rest until we have that real accountability, and we will not vote for these appropriations bills that do not include that kind of significant reform and accountability.
Let's go to this side. Yes, sir.
How many Democrats do you anticipate will support your all's proposal to not support any ICE funding?
I don't have a precise number on that, but we feel very strongly as a caucus. The vote was overwhelming, nearly unanimous, I believe. And two, we've heard from all quarters of the Democratic caucus, members who are very concerned about what's transpiring, understand that DHS is out of control, that the abuses are pervasive and throughout, and that it needs to stop. So we know that there'll be additional support from other caucuses.
And if this means, we have another government shutdown because you guys, don't approve of this funding, what is your message to Democrats and to lawmakers?
Well, we're not ready to talk about a government shutdown. We're talking about an issue that's captivating the nation and the need for reform of an agency that's received so much money that they don't know what to do with it. And the more that they have, the more that they'll spend, the more the abuses that will occur on American citizens and other individuals. Yes.
Thank you. If you propose defunding ICE, then how would you deal specifically with illegal immigrants who do have criminal backgrounds in the U.S.?
Look, the law is clear on the removal of such immigrants who may have criminal records. We're not opposed to that. What we're opposed to is the trampling of constitutional rights, the racial profiling, the use of masks, the use of the deadly use of force, the disrespect that agents show in our communities has never been inflicted on any community in recent history. And that's what really is at the heart of all of this. You can't be treated like dirt and not protest and not be outraged about what's happened. Yes.
Thank you. Similar to that question, but if funding or authority even for ICE is reduced, who ultimately fills that enforcement gap, and how do you reassure the American people that these changes won't end up shielding the criminals?
Well, I'll defer to ranking member.
Look, I want to be very clear that what's happening right now is the Trump administration is taking away law enforcement that should be focusing on real national security threats, on real criminals, and deploying them to immigration and harassment, kidnapping, detention, killing of U.S. citizens, residents, undocumented immigrants who have never committed any crime in this country. That is what's happening. 25% of FBI agents have been deployed to this. Homeland Security Investigations, which is HSI, part of ICE, used to focus on real criminal investigations. And even those of us who didn't like what ICE was doing used to support many of those investigations that HSI used to carry out. Those were important investigations. HSI is now working on this. And you may have seen the news that the prosecutors who at the Department of Justice who are responsible for the so-called fraud investigation in Minnesota just stepped down and resigned because this is being used to go after immigration, go after people in the state of Minnesota just randomly. And today we played the video in Judiciary Committee of doors being battered down. I just want to remind everybody that the Fourth and Fifth Amendments of the Constitution apply to everybody, citizens and non-citizens alike. So I think we have to actually look at this and turn your question the other way and say, do you care about actual national security and public safety? Because what is happening right now is undermining the safety and security of all Americans across this country.
Can I add something too?
Go back to this side. Yes.
But can I add something on that real
Oh, sure.
quick? Just real quick. Everyone should be aware that progressives in Congress are the crime fighters in Congress. And this isn't just like a talking point that I'm making up. We have a record on this as well. Donald Trump does not care about fighting crime. He doesn't care about keeping our people safe. What does the record show? Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, putting forth an Office of Gun Violence Prevention, making sure that we fund agencies like ATF to actually go after secondary and black market guns and ghost guns. And guess what? It worked. For the past 3 years, the last 3 years of the Biden administration, gun violence that went down the most it's ever gone down in our nation's history, including homicides by gun. What are the first things that Donald Trump did? Gut ATF. Get rid of crime gun intelligence. Get rid of the Office of Gun Violence Prevention. Scale back community violence intervention work. All these things that were supported in many cases in a bipartisan effort, Trump got rid of. Yeah, and pardon insurrectionists and pardon people. So I just think it's important to know that for a lot of time, those on the right here in Congress want to use crime and talk about safety as a political point to win an election. Then they get into office and they don't do anything to actually make our people safer. They try to use it for their own agenda. We have passed legislation that has resulted in less people dying and less crime being committed. Those are the numbers. And they don't care about how Donald Trump feels about them. Because every life saved, and behind every number, there's a human. And we get that. So if you want to ask somebody about crime, please ask congressional Republicans and Donald Trump why they're fine with gutting the ATF, why they're fine with completely stepping away from making sure that we do something about the black market of guns and ghost guns that are hurting our communities and that are out there killing our people.
That's community safety. Yes.
Thank you for taking my question. Oh, sorry, Congressman.
Sorry, I was just, there's.
Just on, I understand your position related to DHS appropriations bill is focused heavily on immigration enforcement and what happened in Minnesota. But obviously part of the DHS appropriations bill, it also funds the TSA, it also funds FEMA. And so when you guys make this position about not voting for a DHS appropriations bill that doesn't have reforms to ICE and those immigration services, how do those people like TSA agents and people who need FEMA funding factor into that? Given, TSA agents just work for over 40 days without getting paid during the government shutdown. So what's your message to those people if you're not going to vote for a DHS appropriations bill?
The greatest abuses and trampling of Americans' rights are occurring in the places that are in the news right now. No caucus is as pro-labor and pro-worker as is the Progressive Caucus. We have many, many champions in our ranks. We appreciate all of that. We think that the American public, especially new polling that was released, is in a new place about these abuses. They want it stopped. They don't want the types of tragedies that we've seen all over, and they're sickened by the trampling of people's constitutional rights and the racial profiling that is going on in communities. We're sensitive to that. What we're saying is, let's sit down, let's work out some reforms, and then we can talk about appropriations and votes. Yes.
Thank you so much. I have a question for Representative Omar.
Sorry, sure.
The question that I have, if you are, how are you coordinating with state and local officials in Minnesota to support affected communities in Minneapolis and St. Paul and then these tragic events happening?
I mean, we have our staff that is in the district doing the constant work of making sure our congressional delegation, obviously the Democratic congressional delegation from Minnesota, and our local communities are getting information that is necessary, but also taking that information and seeing ways in which we could be supportive. Thanks.
I understand we have Michael from the New York Times here.
Yeah,
yes.
So much pressure now. I wanted to ask, so you guys are talking about attaching meaningful reform to an appropriations bill, but as I'm sure you know, Secretary Noem in a court filing on Saturday suggested the sheer amount of money that was given to DHS during that reconciliation bill exempts them from an existing oversight requirement appropriations. So how do you contend with that as you're pushing for meaningful reform on a spending bill that she's already suggesting she has enough money to work around?
You want to do it?
Okay, first of all, it's a BS argument, and hopefully the court is going to say that. Clearly, we have to spell things out even more than we have. But first of all, you can't make an argument that in that particular case of that detention, that federal facility, that is a federal building, as I understand it, Representative Omar, and you can't suddenly say that that was only funded by the one big bad betrayal bill. So it's not, we don't think we're in court around that. We don't think it's going to hold up. But what I would say is, why are Republicans refusing to have accountability for agents who go rogue? Why are they refusing to have an independent investigation into this? Why were they immediately out trying to classify what happened and lie about what happened and gaslight the American people who saw it with their own eyes? Because they don't want, and Kristi Noem herself, by the way, on CNN said, you can't trust the government. And Dana Bash said, you are the government. She said, I know, that's what I'm saying. So I don't think we can trust what they're saying right now, and it's an unfortunate thing, but I think we have to be aware that when we write the appropriations language, we're going to have to spell out even more clearly than we have what this applies to, and they can't try to draw this distinction between what was in the big bad betrayal bill and what's in appropriations. I don't think the court will see what the court does.
I also want to reiterate that two of the three shooting victims that have been in the news, the first one last summer at the end of June, Silverio Villegas, had just dropped his kids off from school. Same thing in Minneapolis. And the third one, the woman, my neighboring community, who was shot 5 times, Marimar, they also called her a domestic terrorist. The case fell apart. It was dismissed. They dropped the charges. They've used these labels on every single one of those instances, and that's reprehensible, unconscionable. Yes, sir.
I understand the official position is just related to the DHS funding bill, but if there aren't any reforms to ICE or changes to ICE policy, should Democrats oppose the other funding bills to try to force Republicans to the negotiating table and try to get some policy concession?
We have our position on this bill. We want to deal with that. We're ready to engage, and we're ready to negotiate. We'll take them one at a time. Yes. Nick? Oh, Nick.
Several of you have referred to the shooting of Renee Good as murder. There hasn't been, a complete investigation. Are you perhaps prejudging, the possibility of getting a fair trial for the shooter or his rights to the due process by calling it murder before hitting the charge?
Could I ask you a follow-up question? Would you ask that of the president and Kristi Noem when immediately they called the victim a domestic terrorist? That's right. And then they're going to be the ones that are going to conduct the investigation and ice out Minnesota from doing it? The reality is, as you see more and more footage, it is clear for us there was an intent to kill. I just did an interview with BBC with a former ICE director under Donald Trump, and we talked about the number of shots. And he said, it doesn't matter the number of shots. He was trying to justify it. Yeah, the number of shots matter. There was an intent to kill. And then he went further and called her a fucking bitch. So I think we can go back and forth on that. What we are saying is we want to see an independent investigation. The public is demanding it. And for the sake of our own credibility as government officials, whether you're Republican or Democrat, that investigation has to happen because that investigation has been denied for Silverio Villegas, Gonzalez, and others. And the time right now is now, and we have an appropriations process to hold them accountable with.
And I will just say that the very first person that made a determination about this case was Kristi Noem.
That's right.
And then Donald Trump.
That's right.
So I introduced an amendment today on a judiciary bill to call for an independent investigation into this because this is what our...
All right, a lengthy press conference that is still going from the Progressive Caucus talking about funding for the Department of Homeland Security and, of course, the killing that happened in Minneapolis last Wednesday that continues to make headlines here in the United States. Now, that will do it for us here on Live Impact News. We hope to see everybody back here same time tomorrow, and we have just enough time for a last word from the People's producer, Nia Campbell.
No last words.
No last words from Nia Campbell, which means this is the last word. We'll see everybody tomorrow.